Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Happy Monday. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Jim has not tapped his first Guinness yet, so, well, at least as far as I know. But
Oh, Greg, when you assume, you make a you-know-what out of you and me. No AM ale for me yet so far. We're counting the minutes till the end of this podcast.
But we really have 5 different things we're going to be talking about today. We've got our 2 good martinis, actually. One is related to a foreign policy, national security decision the president made over the weekend. Another is related to, I don't know, gloating, I guess is a good way to put it. But it's a very fun one, and it's all on the left. And we'll also be taking a look at something else Trump did over the weekend, which probably isn't going to fly. And then we actually have 2 different toasts towards the end of our podcast today. So make sure you stick around for all of that. I know you'll want to. So, Jim, let's start with good martini number 1. And you described this on Twitter or X over the weekend as good Trump reappears. And it was on this past weekend where Caroline Leavitt announced, and Donald Trump himself announced on Truth Social, today I've ordered the United States military to launch decisive and powerful military action against the Houthi terrorists in Yemen. They have waged an unrelenting campaign of piracy, violence, and terrorism against American and other ships, aircraft, and drones. Then he goes and talks about how Biden was weak on this issue. The last American warship to go through the Red Sea was 4 months ago and was attacked by the Houthis more than a dozen times. He says the attacks on American vessels will not be tolerated. We will use overwhelming lethal force until we have achieved our objective. The Houthis have choked off shipping in one of the most important waterways of the world, grinding vast swaths of global commerce to a halt. No errors found there. He says to all Houthi terrorists, your time is up and your attacks must stop. This is in all caps now. Starting today, if they don't, hell will rain down upon you like nothing you've ever seen before. We've seen that language certainly before. It says no terrorist force will stop American commercial and naval vessels from freely sailing the waterways of the world. And then he ends with a warning to Iran. Support for the Houthi terrorists must end immediately. Do not threaten the American people, their president, on and on it goes. So, Jim, this is an issue we had talked about many times before. The Houthis attacking American interests in the region and obviously forcing commerce all the way around the Horn of Africa for many different countries, China being a very notable exception. So what do you make of Trump's decision here and how it's being enforced so far?
You know, I don't know if either you or I nominated this for our undercovered story of the year for 2024. There's a lot of competition for that title, but this has got to rank up there. Look, different estimates will give you slightly different numbers, but, before the Houthis went on this rampage, anywhere from 10 to 15% of all trade in the world went through the Red Sea. And as soon as the Houthis started shooting missiles and drones and attempted hijackings, and they attacked a ship that had 4 times as much oil as the Exxon Valdez and actually put explosives on it and detonated them. Basically, everybody else has got to go, as you said, go around Africa. Chinese shipping was the exception. Oh, by the way, the Houthis were getting Russian intelligence, and oh, by the way, they were getting North Korean weapons. So once again, the axis of the devils, or whatever you want to call it, the axis of you-know-whats, is manifesting and at work here. And this was a straight up protection racket. China's on their side. So Chinese flagships get to go through free with no issues. But any Western ships or any other international ships do get targeted for harassment and deadly attacks and things like that. It was kind of ludicrous at one point. And yes, the Navy was fighting them. At one point, this was described as the most intense naval fighting for the U.S. Navy since World War II. Right around the same time that President Biden was saying, we're proud to report that no U.S. soldier is at war anywhere in the world. I don't know whether Biden had been briefed on it and just forgotten, or just want to pretend it wasn't happening, or what it was. Donald Trump is bringing a long overdue rectification of this policy, which is, if you shoot at us, we will shoot back at you a lot. And by the time we're done, there will not be anything left of you. This is started on Saturday. The Houthis shot back Sunday. Nothing hit any U.S. forces. We hit back again today, Monday morning. We'll see how this continues. One U.S. official told Reuters this is expected to go on. This could well go on for weeks. Noting that also, by the way, I was very pleased to see that Trump's message directly spoke to the Iranians. The Houthis say, oh, we're independent. We're not doing this on orders from Iran, but they get all their weapons from Iran, right? Let's point out, the Houthis, we're picturing the stock photos you usually get for the Houthis are these guys in pickup trucks with machine guns, and that's their ground forces. They also fired a ballistic missile at Israel. Like they have armament, and they're not making them there in Yemen. Yemen is not a giant world producer of weapons. It is, however, receiving a whole bunch from Iran. This goes back to it being a proxy war with Saudi Arabia going back to before the Biden administration. So this is long overdue. Really glad to see the president saying so. As I said, this is good Trump. Needless to say, a lot of folks are like, there's no such thing as bad Trump. Everything he does is great. Well, look, Donald Trump can get pretty bellicose at times, and I liked what he was saying with Hamas. Last I checked, I still haven't seen hell arrive to Hamas, but apparently maybe Buttigieg was arranging the travel plans. I don't know. It might be a little bit delayed. But either way, the Houthis are paying the price. I'm glad to see it. I think if they get into a fight with the U.S. Navy, they're going to find out that our weapons and targeting is a heck of a lot better than their drones and their efforts to attack shipping. So I think, I saw people saying, here's Trump starting another war. Whoa. We've been at war since like 2023. They just the Biden administration just want to tell you about it. They're hoping in a very faulty Towers manner, don't bring up the war. Don't bring up the fact that we're shooting at the Houthis and the Houthis are shooting back at us. And maybe the American people won't notice and they'll think everything's fine. Well, it's not fine. And so, I have no guarantee how this is going to shake out. It's war. There's always risk involved. But it's just good to see the U.S. saying, no, this is an international water. Our ships have every right to go through here. And if you shoot at us, we're going to shoot back at you with overwhelming force. I don't get to say this very often. Bravo, particularly in the realm of foreign policy, but bravo, Mr. President.
Quick question, because you're going to get this, and we did get this as soon as this was announced. I saw it on Twitter from former Congressman Justin Amash. I haven't seen it from Rand Paul yet, but he's usually saying something like this at times like this. You shouldn't do this unless you have authorization from Congress. What's your reaction to that? Well,
way back in, was it 2001, we did the authorization for the use of military force that really was broadly written. And if somebody wants to argue that it was excessively broadly, I'm willing to listen to those arguments. But it's very hard to argue that we can shoot back at every other hostile Islamist force shooting at our forces, but we're not allowed to shoot at this one.
All right. Well, let's talk about our great sponsor for today, and that is ZocDoc. When was the last time you needed to go to the doctor? Maybe you think you're too busy, or you'll just get better on its own. The pain will go away. Whatever it is, you make excuses and you justify your reasons for not going. But ZocDoc could not make it easier, as Jim Garrity recently found out.
Yeah, it's about a year ago. One of my optometrists had moved away, and I needed to find one a little bit closer to my home. Greg, I remembered ZocDoc had been a sponsor of this podcast, and it's back again. We're very happy to see them. And I was like, I'll plug it in. Find me an optometrist close. Well, they found one within like 5 minutes. And not only that, it was easy to line up an appointment. And I understand if you're out there and you're like, I don't like going to the doctor. I'm always getting bad news. Or what if they tell me, something I really don't want to hear? Went to the optometrist. My eyes have actually gotten better since the last time. So needless to say, I love this optometrist. But ZocDoc could not have made it any easier to line up the appointment, find one who was a convenient time and place, just have easy to use app, nothing to complain about. Just what you need when you're, for that sense of, I really should be going to see a doctor one of these days.
Stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/3ML to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/3ML. ZocDoc.com/3ML. All right, Jim, on to our second good martini, and for that we turn to former Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema, for most of her life a Democrat, and then an independent the last, year and change, when she was contemplating trying to run for re-election. Ultimately, she decided not to. Ruben Gallego, the far-left Democrat, now holds that Senate seat. But one of the reasons the Democrats hated Kyrsten Sinema and would not have reelected her out there in Arizona or even renominated her is because she and Joe Manchin refused to kill the legislative filibuster. She wouldn't do it for their voting bill. She wouldn't do it for abortion. She wouldn't do it for anything. And so they said she had to go. And so over the last week, of course, we had this huge debate over the continuing resolution. It passed in the House, which was no easy feat for Mike Johnson. And then it went to the Senate, where it was going to be a little bit tricky because it's a 53-47 Republican majority, but you need 60 votes to cut off debate and get to a final vote, which is a simple majority. So Republicans couldn't cut off debate by themselves. And you had a lot of House Democrats like AOC, like Ro Khanna, like a whole bunch of them, Jasmine Crockett, you name them, on the far left, certainly, Rashida Tlaib, saying, you have to filibuster this. You have to filibuster this. This is absolutely unquestioned. And then Ultimately, Chuck Schumer said that he would break and vote to invoke cloture. And ultimately, I think 9 crossed over and they got 62 or something like that. Maybe 61 because Rand Paul was against it as well. But Kyrsten Sinema is enjoying this little hypocritical twist. And so she says she's just taking screenshots of all these people who had been demonizing her. First of all, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on Chuck Schumer saying she has a deep sense of outrage and betrayal. Then Kyrsten Sinema screenshots AOC from back in the day saying, we could protect Roe tomorrow, but Sinema refuses to act on the filibuster. Until that changes, she can take a seat talking about women's access to health care. Hold everyone contributing to this disaster accountable. GOP and Dem obstructionists included. She should be primaried. And Sinema now says, change of heart on the filibuster, I see. Then we've got Robert Reich, the former Clinton labor secretary, saying the real choice Democrats face is not between a continuing resolution that allows the government to function normally or a government shutdown. He's going on and on about, protecting democracy and all that. Screenshots in from September of 22. Today, Senator Sinema expressed her admiration for both Mitch McConnell and the Senate filibuster, adding that she's not only against abolishing the 60-vote threshold required to pass legislation, she's for strengthening it. And Kyrsten Sinema now says, glad to see you've joined the filibuster admiration club. Next, Pramila Jayapal, longtime leader of the House Progressive Caucus, saying, you can't betray working families. Don't give Elon Musk and Trump a blank check. Don't be complicit in the slashing of government, on and on and on. And Kyrsten Sinema screenshots one from just last September 24. It's the filibuster or an assault weapons ban. It's the filibuster or codified abortion access. It's the filibuster or raising the minimum wage. It's the filibuster or protecting voting rights. The choice is clear. Abolish the Jim Crow filibuster. And Sinema says, just surprised to see support for the Jim Crow filibuster here. And so on and on it goes. So, Jim, she is clearly enjoying this. She should be enjoying this because the hypocrisy of the Democrats on this is about as blatant as you could imagine. The reason you want to keep the filibuster is because eventually you'll be in the minority and you're going to need it.
Greg, you and I used to joke on this podcast, the idea that, well, when you're in the majority, the filibuster is a Jim Crow era, long-standing, unconstitutional, because it's not in the Constitution, tool of repression. But when Democrats are in the minority, it's a long-standing tool to protect the rights of the minority party in Congress. It's valuable tool. That, we were afraid of the mob. We shouldn't let the majority run roughshod. What started out as parody has now pretty much become standard Democratic Party positioning. Every once in a while, you'll get a Amy Klobuchar type will come out and say, yeah, maybe we shouldn't have, eliminated the filibuster for Supreme Court justices and stuff like that. All of a sudden, it comes back to bite them. But by and large, the filibuster is now, again, Democrats attempted to use the filibuster on the spending bill. Not a single one said, hey, wasn't this a Jim Crow era relic? No, it just poof. All of a sudden, it's hunky-dory. It's perfectly fine. It's totally normal. There's nothing unconstitutional about it. Everybody should be proud to filibuster. So Kyrsten Sinema absolutely deserves to completely posterize going like Michael Jordan in the old, Nike commercials and dunking right on every single one of them. Most notably AOC, who claimed that Democrats never used the filibuster. Now, you and I have seen some whitewashing in our time. I'm sure she'd find it racially insensitive to use the term whitewashing for this. You and I have seen some serious efforts to rewrite history, do some Stalinist airbrushing of it. Democrats never use it. Really? There's an argument that says you should always be wary when someone is using I'm doing it myself. You should often be wary when someone uses the term always or never, because very rarely is it absolutely 100% one way or the other. If AOC had said, in the past when Democrats were in the minority, I don't think that they should have used the filibuster more. Okay, you could say that. It's a little more reasonable. But she argued that Democrats were always holding it in reserve, always holding it for later, and that they never used it when it was absolutely necessary. Here they are using it. They didn't have enough votes. Chuck Schumer, took the slings and arrows because he recognized that Democrats had the option of folding now, which was going to stink. There are two ways about it, or holding out, refusing to sign on to a bill to fund the government, having the government shut down, go on for as long as they needed to, and then at some point then they would fold. And so you get a double loss. So he took what his mind was the lesser of two evils. People like AOC are spitting hot fire and mad about this. But in the end, you didn't have any leverage. You did, and the idea that, but the double standard on the filibuster is fascinating. It's hilarious. And I hope Kyrsten Sinema just hangs around. I just want to see her. She probably can't be on the floor of the Senate anymore. So I just want her just off there, chewing gum, arms folded, shaking her head, saying, I warned you. Oh, you like that filibuster now, huh? Good thing somebody preserved it. Good thing somebody saved you from yourself. Because if you'd gotten your way, you wouldn't have anything you wanted. Of course, in the minds of AOC, well, then they would have won a bajillion Senate seats in the last election if only they'd eliminated the filibuster. Filibuster is always evil right up till the moment they need it.
Yes. No, exactly. And they have used it. They just used it a couple of weeks ago. Every Democrat who showed up that day, 45 of them out of the 47, voted not to ban males and women's sports. So that's how they're using it when they do it. So well done, Kyrsten Sinema. Your victory lap is well earned. You paid a pretty steep price for it. So enjoy pointing out all the hypocrisy. All right, Jim, on to our crazy martini now. And for that, we head back to Donald Trump's Truth Social account. And for actually early this morning, as it turns out, 12:47 a.m., which is always a fun time for people to be tweeting. But he now says the pardons that Sleepy Joe Biden gave to the unselect committee of political thugs and many others are hereby declared void, vacant, and of no further force or effect because of the fact that they were done by auto pen. In other words, Joe Biden did not sign them, but more importantly, he did not know anything about them. The necessary pardoning documents were not explained to or approved by Biden. He knew nothing about them, and the people that did may have committed a crime. Therefore, those on the Unselect Committee who destroyed and deleted all evidence obtained during their 2-year witch hunt of me and many other innocent people should fully understand that they are subject to investigation at the highest level. The fact is, they were probably responsible for the documents that were signed on their behalf without the knowledge or consent of the worst president in the history of our country, crooked Joe Biden. So, Jim, I definitely think there are moments from the Biden presidency where he ended up signing or authorizing things that he didn't know what he was doing. We know about the story from House Speaker Mike Johnson, where Johnson went to confront him about cutting off liquefied natural gas exports to Europe, and Biden insisting, no, it was just an executive order to study it, not to actually do it. So that certainly makes you wonder about a lot of different things. Proving it on that or any other issue, I think is going to be pretty difficult, and I don't expect the courts to go along with this. What do you make of it?
Yeah, what's frustrating here is that Trump is at minimum within an area code and perhaps within a zip code of a legitimate point, which is how much did Joe Biden really know what he was doing when he was signing documents put in front of him? And the Mike Johnson story is probably the best and most specific example we have. But we should point out, lots of presidents have used AutoPen. Now, usually it's for like letters from the president or mass mailers or stuff like that. I think somewhere I have a autographed picture of George H.W. Bush that's clearly AutoPen done. And darn it, you can't really fool eBay. Anyway, the kind of recognition that, like, sure, using the AutoPen by itself is not unconstitutional or make something illegitimate or something like that. What would be legitimate is if the president did not know he was signing it. And if Trump's got a more specific case example of this, I'm all ears. And I don't think it's crazy to think. Unfortunately, we don't have any specific, in the examples he's citing, we don't have any reason to think that's the case. And furthermore, come on, Biden knew he was signing his son's pardon.
Yeah.
Right? I feel like that one I feel pretty good about. I feel like he pretty much sure he knew what he was talking about. At this point, there's no real reason to say, okay, well, clearly he was out of his mind when he signed these things. And what's more, I just want to make sure, so the Trump presidency Donald Trump wants to establish the precedent that one president can undo the pardon of another president. You sure you want to go down that line? Because a lot of pardons from this president. And I get the feeling between now and the end of the Trump presidency, we're going to get a whole lot more. And if some future if you establish this, we're like, well, I decided the previous president was cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs at that time. Therefore, the pardon is not valid. DOJ, go get him. Like, I could see that being very bad for the Trump team. I could see a lot of Trump people not liking that. So, up until now, the attitude has been once a president pardons somebody, that's game over. Game over, man. Game over, as we see in Aliens. There's no way of appealing that. There's no way of overcoming that. Again, I know Trump has got an axe to grind against all these people. I know he's probably fuming about it. Unless you've got concrete evidence that President Biden did not know what he was signing, I think all these pardons are valid and that they are stuck there. Look, maybe we could take this up to the Supreme Court. See, at this point, I think for a lot of these issues, let's send it up to the Supreme, see what they think.
Yeah,
they'll give you some clarity one way or the other.
I'm not sure how you'd even get proof of that, unless it's one of these tell-all books of, I actually used the autopan when Joe was at the beach and all these things got out there. I don't think you're going to get that because that person would probably then be up for some prosecution. With all these legal issues happening, you've got the illegal gang members that are now, I think, in El Salvador, and they were ordered back here, and you've got people fighting over the Department of Education and DOJ cuts. I think the Supreme Court just needs, pick a day of the week, Trump Wednesday, and we're going to spend a couple hours going through this mountain of legal challenges to all this stuff, because otherwise stuff's just going to get delayed for months and months and months while it works up the chain. So from what I understand, back in the day, whether it was Bush 41 or maybe even Reagan, I think it was when Bill Barr was originally Attorney General, he would just appeal straight to the Supreme Court and try to get an answer right away. And right now it's probably your best bet of getting the answer you want. So it might be the smartest way to do it.
And it succeeded in that example that Barr was originally talking about, Greg. So I salute that. I would actually go one step further. I would establish at the U.S. Supreme Court a drive-through lane.
Yes.
Just as soon as one of these, welcome to McSupremes. Let's see what your court case is. Would you like fries with that? Okay. Pull up to the window, and then you get your window, your verdict really quick, and okay, we would know whether this was constitutional or not. We have a great system. It just could be a little more streamlined than efficient.
Yes, exactly. Otherwise, we're going to be finally getting resolution on these cases halfway through the term. But nonetheless, well, those are our 3 martinis for the day. But as mentioned, there are a couple of champagne toasts. One is a figure that a lot of people around Washington knew. Actually, both of these people are well known around Washington. One was probably more famous to the casual public, and that was longtime Wyoming Senator Alan Simpson. Served 3 terms from the late 70s to the mid to late 90s. Kind of a moderate Republican, kind of more liberal on the social issues, a fiscal conservative for sure. He was co-chair of one of those, hey, let's get serious about being fiscally responsible in government. He did it with Erskine Bowles. I think it was in the early Obama years. And of course, then everybody just ignored the findings of the group and they ran up massive deficits, as we continue to do. But he was also well known for his wit. He didn't suffer fools gladly. One of the things that I remember him saying, and the one I was able to find, this is part of his eulogy for the first President Bush, talking about character in Washington.
Those who travel the high road of humility in Washington, D.C. are not bothered by heavy traffic.
For the most part, a pretty reliable Republican vote, and I believe he was on Bush's shortlist for the 88 running mate that ultimately went to Dan Quayle.
I suppose we could say that when you are a Republican in Wyoming, taking a brave stance is a little bit easier than, say, representing a swing state. That you got a little bit more of a cushion in that. And I think it was in retirement where he really, was both chairing those commissions on entitlement reform and being a voice for making all the hard choices that really nobody else in Washington wants to do. Nonetheless, the entire persona of Republicans who worry about the deficit and the debt and the sustainability of entitlement programs, they have all kinds of kind of derisive nicknames like green eye shade Republicans. And the idea is that they all look like Irving R. Levine or, these boring dweeby bow tie clad, guys who are just worried about numbers and who nobody wants to listen to them. Well, Alan Simpson was not that and was actually very funny and very blunt and very direct and willing to, when somebody else was arguing 2 + 2 = 5, he would say, no, it's 4. And he didn't really care who he pissed off. And that's, you could argue those are traits we could use a great deal more of in Washington. Look, there are a lot of times if you're on the right side of the spectrum, you're going to feel like Sisyphus. You're going to feel like you are pushing for changes that nobody wants. You are pointing out inconvenient truths that nobody wants to hear. Alan Simpson embodied that to his, dying breath. I suspect his last words were probably something like, you've got to do something about entitlement spending. And then he stopped being a drain on Social Security, being a role model for the rest of us. So, but anyway, no, Alan Simpson, you will be missed.
Exactly. One other thing he probably wishes he wasn't remembered for would be Simpson-Mazzoli, the immigration bill from the mid-'80s that Reagan signed. It led to the amnesty of about, I think, 3 million people in the country illegally. But it was supposed to be in exchange for much tighter border security. It's one of those moments in the Reagan administration where you trust the other side to actually implement the part that you're more excited about in the legislation. And once again, just kind of like, oh, if you just raise taxes, we'll cut spending. They never do it. So it's a cautionary tale. And I don't think that he intended for the effects to be what they were from that. He expected there to be significant border enforcement, which there wasn't. But it's a cautionary tale as we move forward now and people push for more border legislation. You got to secure it before you do anything else. The other person that we're going to talk about here, perhaps not as much of a household name for some, but someone who has been very, very critical in Jim Garrity's career, who he called his Obi-Wan Kenobi, Tony Dolan.
Yeah, Tony Dolan won a Pulitzer Prize, went to Yale, but was, probably best known for being Reagan's chief speechwriter for the full 8 years. And pretty much there's not a Reagan speech that didn't have his fingerprints on it in one form or another, sometimes a light touch, sometimes a heavier touch. Peter Robinson wrote the, Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall speech, but he was on his podcast this week talking about that. And basically, Tony Dolan ran interference for him, kept the State Department out of his hair and allowed him to write the speech that, Reagan is remembered forever for. My connection, so way back in the Mesozoic era of 2004, when we were riding dinosaurs to our jobs, and I was working from home, and Bush is running against John Kerry. I am writing the Kerry spot for National Review. It is my big break for National Review. I'm finally in conservative media after working in a variety of mainstream media publications, wire services, places like that. And I get to see how this guy, Tony Dolan, wants to talk to you. And I was not that familiar with him, and I got a chance to talk to him. And it was just, it was the grandfather I always wanted to have. And Tony was funny and had been everywhere and done everything. Sharp, smart, and he just starts telling me, Jim, don't. The American people, a vote is a very sacred part to them. They go into that voting booth, and Americans take that responsibility very seriously. They're not going to vote for a guy like John Kerry. They understand the stakes. And he was just so reassuring. So after a while, I want to quote him. And he's like, well, you can't use my name. At that point, Tony was advising Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld in terms of communications and messaging and stuff. He'd had a variety of jobs like that. And to be perfectly honest, I get the feeling sometimes they just liked having an old hand around the office to tell stories of the old days and to say, here's how you do the messaging of it. One of the reasons I have that perspective is that Tony, after 2004, after that, the Bush administration winds down, he signs on with the Fred Thompson team. And we all loved the late Fred Thompson, but I think it's safe to say that Fred Thompson didn't have that fire in the belly. And Tony's recommendation, I later heard, was that Fred Thompson should buy like a half hour of TV time in Iowa and speak directly into the camera for a solid 30 minutes about the challenges facing the country. And Reagan did this stuff back in the 80s. By 2008, that was just not the style in a short attention span. MTV video, internet, social media world is evolving there. And so everybody, they loved him, but they were just like, Grandpa, I'm not sure this is the right move here. Unfortunately, my story with Tony does not have a particularly happy ending. By 2012, Tony had signed on with the Newt Gingrich presidential campaign. And I still wanted to talk to Tony. In fact, he overlapped a bit with our time here at the 3 Martini Lunch. We talked about the 2010 midterms, and he was fairly optimistic throughout all that, and that one went pretty darn well for Republicans. And Tony was just telling me, Newt has got this. He's got it in the bag. He's the country. Just know. And I'm like, really? You sure? Newt Gingrich, as bright as he is, as inventive and creative as he is, he was never ahead in that primary that Romney eventually won. And Newt had some good moments during that, but I head to head, he was never doing well against Obama. And it just became tougher for me to quote Tony when he was saying, trust me, the campaign paying me is doing a great job. Yeah, I kind of figured you'd feel that way, Tony. I think, end of 2011, National Review, some folks at National Review were very critical of Newt Gingrich and his presidential bid. Mark Stein writes a cover piece just ripping Gingrich to shreds, and people may remember Newt Gingrich, the cover of National Review had Newt as Marvin the Martian from the old Warner Brothers cartoons. And it was called Newt's World. It was all about how he wanted to do mineral mining on asteroid. Like, Newt had a million ideas a day, and some of them were good, some of them were bad, and some of them were just out there. And, and to say Tony was outraged by what National Review had done was kind of like saying the Jets have had some disappointing seasons lately. He was livid. And he says he ripped me. I had nothing to do with that column, that issue of the magazine. I didn't really disagree with it. I mean, I was certainly a Newt skeptic, shall we say. But he took it as a huge betrayal, and apparently went around town saying National Review has lost its way. Nobody should listen to them, etc. And he stopped returning my phone calls, and he stopped returning my emails. And I lost a mentor who I really had was a special part for me. We ran it. I didn't see him until many years later at CPAC. Our last interaction was brusque and not. I lost my cool and I said, "Hey, you walked away from me. It wasn't me walking away from you." And to say that I was hurt by how it all shook out, yeah, it was. And that was unfortunately the last time we spoke. I never got a chance to patch things over with him. The last observation on this is that somebody years later, I write the Dangerous Click novels. And somebody observes that the protagonists, which clearly are inspired by myself and my friends, they have a mentor named Merlin, the magician, and who's an old CIA deputy director who's brilliant, been everywhere, done everything, but maddeningly moody. And you never really know where you stand with them and can sometimes drive you crazy. And somebody said, is Merlin Obi-Wan Kenobi? I didn't write it that way. But once I thought about it, like, oh, wait. That is Tony. That is exactly, and the way the characters feel about that guy is exactly the way I had felt about being blessed with a great mentor for about 6-7 years and then having it end very badly. So anyway, Tony, I miss you. You were very instrumental in setting me on the path that I'm on. Wise, funny, and I will miss your stories and jokes, my friend. So rest in peace. And I suppose we'll get to rectify someday some other place.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos, Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please do subscribe to our podcast. If you don't already, tell your friends to do so as well. We'd love to have them listening. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a terrific Monday and join us again on Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.